So here we go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Manuel, and thank you very much for inviting me to your seminar. It's my pleasure to talk to you today about the relations between higher education teachers' approaches to teaching and their well-being. And as Manuel already told you, I've been doing research on higher education teaching for quite a while already. So I did my PhD on university teachers' approaches to teaching, and I defended my thesis in 2007, so it's been a while from that already. And after that, I have continued my research on university teaching. I've also done research on learning, and nowadays I'm really interested on the relations between teaching, learning, and well-being. Today, I will talk a bit about the concept of approaches to teaching. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but I will just very shortly introduce you the concept so that you know what I'm talking about. And then I will introduce you the HEAT inventory, which was already mentioned here, and also the HowUTeach self-reflection tool, which we have developed together with my colleagues. And then I will move on to telling a bit more about our ongoing very big research project, which is called the Wellbeing Research Project. And in that project, we explore the relations between higher education teachers, teaching approaches, and well-being. And today I will tell a bit about the first results of the project, where we have looked at the relations between the approaches to teaching and teacher arousal. We have used physiological measures to measure teacher arousal during their teaching, and then also relations to well-being in more general. Okay, but let's move on. So some background about the concept of approaches to teaching. The approaches to teaching has been examined since the 1990s already. And there has been this quite kind of dichotomical approach to looking at the approaches to teaching. The research has been also criticized for that, so that it's too kind of black and white conceptualization of the approaches to teaching, which focus on kind of identifying the teacher-focused approaches to teaching and the student-focused approaches to teaching. And how these concepts originated, they originated from mainly quantitative research. So there has been some criticism that there hasn't been enough qualitative research, which would have then kind of brought up a more rich variation of the categories. So the teacher-focused approach to teaching basically means that there is this very transmissive style of teaching, so that the teacher is delivering information to the students without having much of interaction with the students. It's very typical that the teacher teaches quite in a similar manner, no matter of what the audience is like and what kind of needs that specific audience has. While the student-focused approach to teaching means, in short, that there is more interaction between the teacher and the students, and the teacher is really trying to activate the students and their own knowledge construction. And there has been this approaches to teaching inventory, ATI, which has been very widely used in research during the past decades. It has been developed by Trickwell and Prosser, and I also used that instrument in my own previous studies. But as I said, that there has been the kind of need for more rich description of the approaches to teaching, and also a need to develop a questionnaire, an instrument that would capture the approaches to teaching more broadly. So what I did in my previous research was that we interviewed nearly 100 university teachers And from these qualitative descriptions of their own teaching, we identified a more rich variation of approaches to teaching. And now we have used this interview data to develop this new questionnaire, Higher Education Approaches to Teaching HEAT questionnaire, which I will also introduce you shortly. So in this questionnaire, we have 4 different scales. So we have these which are very similar to what was in the ATI questionnaire, interactive approach and transmissive approach. So the interactive approach means that the teacher uses various methods and strategies to promote interaction between the teacher and the students, and also between the students. There is one item from the questionnaire that is used to measure this interactive approach. It is in teaching situations, I provide an opportunity for students to deepen their understanding about the subject through discussion. And we have for each of these scales 3 items measuring them. The transmissive approach is very much similar to the teacher-focused approach that was identified by Trickwell and Prosser. So it is about transmitting information about the main ideas to the students. And there is again one example item from our questionnaire. So the majority of my teaching time is spent transmitting information to the students about the topic. But then there are 2 new scales, one of which is the unreflective approach. And it means that the teacher has difficulties in reflecting on the students' learning process. So it is difficult for the teachers to understand how students actually learn. They have difficulties in mapping the students' learning process, and also difficulties in understanding how their own teaching influences the student learning. And there is one example item. The student's learning process is so complicated that it is challenging for me to understand how I can support it as a teacher. And then we have also a 4th scale, which is new to this conceptualization of approaches to teaching, and it is called the organized approach. So it's about how the teacher plans the teaching, how much they spend time in preparing their teaching and so forth. And there is one item from this scale: I spend a lot of time preparing my teaching. So now we have done some empirical research also on this and validated this questionnaire, and I will soon go into that one. But what is important to notice is that when we do research on approaches to teaching through using this instrument, it is always very important to look at the data from the perspective of the individual teachers. And by this, I mean that, of course, it's interesting to see what are the means for each scale, for example, among the teachers. But what is more interesting is that how these different approaches are combined when we look at an individual teacher. So, for example, if there is a high interactivity in the teaching, and we can also see that the teacher is very kind of having low scores on unreflective approach and low scores on transmissive approach. That would be the kind of maybe kind of ideal combination of these approaches, because we know from previous research that the kind of student-centered interactive teaching is related also with students' better study success and study progress. So it's always very important to look at the different kinds of combinations. And in my previous research, which Manuel also mentioned, we have looked at the kind of combinations among individual teachers. And for majority of teachers, they show kind of coherent or consistent approaches, which are like theoretically coherent in a way that if the teacher has high interactivity, they typically have low scores on the transmissive approach. But then we have also teachers who score highly, for example, both on the interactive approach and transmissive approach. And we call those profiles like dissonant profiles because it's like theoretically not coherent to report that you are both interactive and transmissive. So it might mean that the teacher has some difficulties in reflecting on their own teaching, or it might mean that the teacher uses both approaches in a conscious manner, so that they think that, okay, that now in this situation I need to use interactive approaches, but then I have different type of goals in my other session, and then I will adopt more of transmissive approaches. So it can also mean that they are like conscious decisions which are deeply reflected on. But it's very interesting to see what kind of different profiles emerge. And soon I will show you results of a study where we looked at how teachers combine these 4 different scales in their teaching, which is like new information because we didn't have this type of four-dimensional inventory previously to measure the approaches to teach. And here are the references to these studies where we have looked at these scales or developed them. So one of them is this publication from 23, which is published in Higher Education. That is the study where you can find the validation of the heat instrument and also some empirical findings of these profiles of the teachers, and also relations to self-efficacy, and I will soon also present you the results. And then we have the other publication from 21, which then describes the HowUTeach self-reflection tool, which is based on this heat inventory partly, and I will also say a few words about that very soon. Okay, so now I will present you results of that study where we validated the heat inventory and also looked at these teaching profiles and their relations to teachers' self-efficacy beliefs. So first about the data that we used in this study. So the participants filled in this heat inventory with 12 items and also a scale measuring self-efficacy. It had 4 items, and this self-efficacy scale was adapted to teaching context from a scale measuring students' self-efficacy beliefs. And there is one example item from that scale. I'm confident that I can manage even in the most difficult teaching situations. And these are all Likert scale items from 1 to 5. And when responding to this questionnaire, the teachers were asked to think about a typical teaching situation while answering the items. So not a specific teaching situation, but kind of what is their general approach to teaching. And the participants were from Finnish, both research-intensive universities and universities of applied sciences, which are more practically oriented. And we had 158 teachers from the research universities and 139 from the universities of applied sciences. And the participants were quite balanced in terms of gender. And we had teachers from various different disciplines, but the teachers representing natural sciences, engineering and technology, and medical and health sciences were well represented in this data. And then a few words about the validation process of the heat instrument. So what we did was that we first did exploratory factor analysis for the research university data, so the teachers who came from the research universities, to identify the factor structure of the questionnaire. And then this identified factor structure was validated through a confirmatory factor analysis with the data from the Universities of Applied Sciences. And after this validation procedure, we merged these two data sets together for a latent profile analysis, which we used for profiling the teachers based on their approaches to teaching. And then we also looked at how self-efficacy beliefs were related to these different teacher profiles. And then some results. So the four-factor model of approaches to teaching emerged from the data with the research university teachers, and it also fitted the University of Applied Sciences data well. And the Cronbach alphas, you can see there, they are circulated from that table, so you can see that they are all above 0.7. So quite good values for the internal consistency. You can also see the correlations there between the different scales. So you can see that what we also expected, that the interactive approach is negatively associated with the transmissive approach, and positively and negatively also with the unreflective approach. And so forth. So these correlations seem quite logical. Okay, and then we moved on to do kind of empirical research with this data. So we did this profiling of the teachers based on how they responded to these 4 different scales. And you can see that we found 4 different types of teachers from this data. So the first profile is called the interactive profile. Then we have the interactive organized profile, mixed profile, and transmissive profile. And I will now go each of them through in a bit more detail. So if we first look at the interactive profile, we had there 60 teachers in this category. And these teachers scored high on the interactive approach and low on transmissive and unreflective approaches. And that's why we labeled them as interactive kind of profile. Then we had the interactive organized profile in which we had 57 teachers, and they also scored very high on the interactive approach. But also very high on the organized approach. As you can see, it's quite close to 5, the mean value of this group of teachers. And then we had the next group, which we labeled as mixed profile, because they didn't kind of score extremely high on any of these scales. So there was less variance in how they responded to the different dimensions than in the other profiles. You can see that they also have quite a high score on the interactive approach, quite a high score also on the organized approach, but they also score, for example, higher on the transmissive approach and unreflective approach than the interactive profile teachers. And this group was also the biggest with 144 teachers. And then finally, we had this profile, which we labeled as the transmissive profile. And these teachers scored the highest on the transmissive approach of all these profiles. So you can see that their score on the transmissive approach was 3.39, which is much higher than in the other profiles. And also you can see that they scored lowest on the interactive profile. So this is clearly different from the other ones in a way that they clearly have more of this information transmission in their teaching. They also scored the highest on the unreflective approach, well, the organized approach is quite similar to some of these other profiles. But here you can see that there are very different kind of teachers in the data concerning how these different teaching approaches are adopted by different teachers. So at least I think that it's always very important to look at these individual profiles rather than just looking at some general level means or some general level analysis. Okay, and then we also wanted to see how these are related to the self-efficacy beliefs, because the previous research on approaches to teaching, which has utilized the approaches to teaching inventory, the previous one with the student and teacher focused categories, that research has already shown that the approaches to teaching are quite tightly related with teachers' self-efficacy beliefs. So we wanted to see how this new type to categorize the teachers based on these 4 different scales is related to the self-efficacy beliefs. And we could see that the profiles differed statistically significantly in the factor measuring the self-efficacy, so that the profiles scoring highest on interactive and organized approaches scored highest on self-efficacy beliefs. And this is in line with the previous research, which shows that the student-centered interactive approach is related with higher self-efficacy beliefs. So in that sense, it's also important to support teachers to adopt an interactive approach to teaching, because it's also related to better self-efficacy beliefs. So they believe that they are capable of instructing their students, and they believe that they have good preparedness to support their students' learning when they learn to adopt these interactive approaches in their own teaching. Okay. And by the way, if you have any questions meanwhile I'm presenting, just you can open your mic anytime. Okay, some discussion and implications from this study. So first of all, we saw that the results support the construct validity of the HEAT instrument, and shows that through using the HEAT questionnaire, it's able to capture the teacher's approaches to teaching more broadly than through the previous quantitative instruments. And we also saw that there is a relation between the teacher's pedagogical competence and their self-efficacy, and that indicates sort of the link between teaching and well-being, because we know that self-efficacy beliefs are at the core of teachers' well-being as well. Also, we have used this HEAT questionnaire now with elementary school teachers, and we also checked how it works in that context, and the results were really promising and showed that the questionnaire also captures well the teachers' approaches to teaching in other school levels. So now we just recently published a paper which describes the results of using this questionnaire among elementary school teachers. And this HEAT questionnaire is part of this HowUTeach self-reflection tool, which I have mentioned, which teachers can use to evaluate their own teaching processes and well-being. And for this HowUTeach, we have developed a kind of counter feedback on these scales, measuring approaches to teaching and self-efficacy, and also some other dimensions as well, which you can see here. So the HowUTeach self-reflection tool is really like a symbol in a way that it is a questionnaire. So the teachers respond to the questionnaire having these Likert scales, but then we have developed written feedback for teachers based on their own responses. So when the teacher responds to this questionnaire and thinks of his or her own teaching while answering to these items, then we calculate their scores on these different scales. And then we give them written feedback, which explains that interactive approach means this and this and this. And you can develop it through doing this or this or this. And if you feel that you have, or if your scores show that you have low scores on this scale, then you can consider on how to improve them. And we have written this kind of counter feedback for each scale. And we have used it in a way that teachers respond in some kind of session to this questionnaire. And then we give them the feedback, and then we organize feedback, reflective feedback discussions with these teachers, so that there is a group of teachers discussing about what ideas they have after responding to this questionnaire about their own teaching, and how the feedback that they received kind of responds to their own conceptions of their own teaching, and what kind of development areas and strengths they identified based on this questionnaire and the feedback. At the moment, in the HowUTeach, we have created the feedback to these 4 scales of the HEAT. So for the interactive, transmissive, unreflective, and organized approaches, and also 2 scales which we use to measure their experiences of the work environment, which is support from colleagues, so how they perceive that they receive support from their colleagues, and how they perceive the autonomy in their own teaching. And then we also measure their burnout and self-efficacy. And we also have some feedback on these scales as well. And then we guide the teachers also to think of the relationships between these different dimensions that we measure. So for example, how their approaches to teaching seem to be related to their well-being, or their experiences of the work environment, for example. So quite often, if we see that there are some kind of challenges with the approaches to teaching in a way that there is high transmissive ways of teaching, that typically also is related to more negative experiences of the work environment, and also challenges with the well-being, and vice versa. When teachers have interactive approaches, and when they are able to reflect on their students' learning processes, that is typically related with more positive experiences of the work environment, and also better teacher well-being. It might, of course, we don't, from the quantitative data, know the kind of directions of these relations, but from qualitative data, we know that when the teachers have difficulties with interactivity in their teaching, they tend to kind of experience their working environment more negatively, and also then that influences their well-being negatively. So it seems to be that the approaches to teaching are really kind of important for teachers in a way that it has influence on how they perceive their working environment, and how they are doing in their work as teachers. Okay, so that is the HowUTeach self-reflection tool, and there is this publication on this. We haven't published the feedback that we have written or created for each of these scales, but if someone is interested in using them, we are very happy to provide them. So there are some of our colleagues, for example, in Sweden and the Netherlands, using this HowUTeach self-reflection tool as part of their pedagogical studies for university teachers. So I know that the HEAT questionnaire has been translated into different languages, but I don't know that it would have been translated into French yet. But if someone is interested in using that and translating the questionnaire, we would be, of course, happy to know about that. But the questionnaire is freely in your use. It is published, all the items, in the publication in higher education, so you can freely use that questionnaire, and if you are interested in using the HowUTeach self-reflection tool and receive the written feedback that we have created, you can just contact me and my colleague Anna Parpala, who has been developing this with me. Okay, but now I will move on to our ongoing research project, which is a four-year project. We are now in the midway, a bit further already. And this project is funded by the Research Council of Finland, and it is done in collaboration between my university and the universities of Helsinki and Tampere. And in this project, we look at the relations between university or higher education teachers, teaching and well-being. And now I will report some results where we have looked at the relations between the teachers' approaches to teaching and their emotions and arousal. So this is our research team. I don't know if some of you recognize some of my colleagues, but so there are 3 PIs, so I'm leading this whole research consortium, and then there is Anna Parpala from the University of Helsinki and Petri Nokelainen from the University of Tampere, and then we have these postdoc researchers in the project from these different universities. So what kind of data we have collected? So we have actually various kinds of data in this project, but I will now present here the ones that are used for this analysis that I'm now telling you about. So we have questionnaire data from 109 higher education teachers, and they represent both universities of applied sciences and research universities. And a majority of them were women. It might be because this project is focused on well-being. It might be more kind of appealing to female colleagues. The average total of their teaching experience in universities was 11.8 years. And the average number of the pedagogical study credit points was 60.5, which is extremely high. So it means that almost all of them had a formal teaching qualification, which is 60 credits in Finland. In universities of applied sciences in Finland, it is mandatory for the teachers to have the formal teacher qualification, but in research universities, they are not required to have any pedagogical formal qualification, but nowadays a majority of them have some pedagogical studies. This questionnaire that we used in this project consisted of several scales. So we have the teacher job satisfaction scale, the Utrecht work engagement scale, the 3-item version of that. Then we have the school burnout inventory, which we a bit modified for the higher education context. Then we have the self-compassion scale and the reflection questionnaire. We also have some other scales, but I'm not referring to those today, so I left them out from here. And also, yeah, we used our own instrument, this heat to measure the approaches to teach. And in addition to the questionnaire data, for these studies that I'm introducing today, we used 3 different types of data. So we did psychophysiological measurements through using smart rings, which measure electrodermal activity. And it is a kind of indication of the arousal of the teachers. And the arousal is related to stress and unconscious emotional responses, and provides quite interesting insights into the teacher's well-being. And the electrodermal activity can be measured from sweating. So it's not based on heart rate or heart rate variability, but on sweating, emotional sweating. So maybe you have also noticed that if you, for example, are very nervous, you start sweating from your hands, and the smart ring reacts to that sweating. So high arousal is caused by emotional sweating, which is caused by increased sweat gland activity. And this ring gives us a measure from 0 to 100. And 100 is the kind of highest arousal, and 0 it means that you would be basically dead. So 50 is somewhere kind of an average arousal level. And also the participants can follow their own arousal levels from their mobile devices. So we used the smart ring so that the teachers were wearing the ring for 1 week, and then they marked in a kind of learning tracker which was in their smartphones when they started teaching, so that we saw that what happens with the arousal when they are teaching. And also they kind of marked when their teaching sessions ended. And in addition to that, we also video recorded these teaching sessions. We video recorded approximately 1 hour teaching session from each of these participating teachers, and these were 46 teachers in this data set. So when they were teaching, they were video recording their own teaching and wearing this smart ring, so that we are able to kind of combine the video data with the smart ring data to see that what happens in those situations, for example, when the arousal goes really high. And after that, we had these guided reflection interviews. So a couple of days after this teaching session, which was video recorded, we interviewed these teachers in a way that we showed them from the videos segments with high and low arousal. And then the teachers explained us that what happened in those situations, what kind of emotions they're experiencing, and so forth, so that we would be able to understand that what causes high arousal, which can be actually positive or negative arousal. So we don't know from the arousal level that we can have from the smart ring if it's like positive arousal, like the teacher is really enthusiastic, or is it negative arousal, like that the teacher is really nervous or anxious or something. So that's why we needed to interview the teachers. So they told us what was happening in those high and low arousal situations, and whether it was like positive or negative experience for them, and what kind of emotions were attached to those. But first I will show you some results from that questionnaire data, just now correlations between the approaches to teaching and the dimensions measuring well-being. So I have marked here with yellow those correlations which show how the well-being scales are correlated with the approaches to teaching. And from here, what is the most kind of striking finding is that the unreflective approach to teaching is related to burnout and seem detrimental also to teacher job satisfaction. So the teachers who have difficulties in understanding the student learning process and understanding how my own teaching influences my students' learning, they also have higher scores on the burnout scales, and also the job satisfaction. So this also kind of strengthens the previous findings, showing that the approaches to teaching are really important for the teacher's well-being. So it is not just that we, through improving the teacher's well-being, we are able to support student learning, but we are also able to support the teacher's own well-being. So that's another kind of good reason to focus on developing the teacher's approaches to teaching towards more interactive and more reflective approaches. Okay, and then when we looked at the relations between approaches to teaching and physiological arousal, so this is also based on the quantitative data, we saw that the unreflective teaching approach was positively and statistically significantly related to overall physiological arousal during the teaching events. So in many of those situations where the physiological arousal was high, that was related to the unreflective teaching approach of the teachers. So the teachers with the unreflective approach seem to exhibit higher arousal during teaching, and we thought that this might be caused because they are uncertain about how their students learn and how they can help them to learn better. So they feel a bit anxious in the teaching situations. They might be nervous about their own skills to support student learning, and that causes them high arousal while they are teaching. So that's very kind of important research information, because we also know that high arousal burdens us. So if it's like a continuing high arousal, it's very burdening, and it can be very detrimental to recovery from teaching events. So therefore, it's really important to investigate how the approaches to teaching and arousal are related, and how we can support the teachers to recognize how their own teaching influences their arousal, and how they can find ways to influence the arousal during the teaching. For example, taking breaks is one way to lower the arousal, but also developing your own teaching towards more interactive and reflective style seems to be a way to influence the arousal based on these results that we have. Then we also went to look at the qualitative data to have a bit more deeper insights into the relations between arousal approaches to teaching and emotions. And we wanted to see what are the relations between approaches to teaching as we analyze them from the video recorded data, not from the questionnaire data, but we can see if the teachers are interacting or delivering information, and how the approaches to teaching are related to the arousal as analyzed from the SmartRing data, and also emotions that the teachers describe during these interviews. And we did this through analyzing the specific teaching episodes that were video recorded, and when the teachers were also wearing the SmartRing. Here you can see an example of one teacher's arousal levels during the teaching episode. So you can see that there is quite a lot of variation in the arousal. So it goes from approximately 30 to 100 to the maximum level, and a lot of variation going on. And then we combined this with the video recording so that we could see that what happens in those different moments. And we now were especially interested in those moments where the arousal was the highest and the lowest. And on the right-hand side, you can see minute by minute the arousal levels from the teacher. And when the arousal level is between 80 and 100, it's like running really high. When it's between 60 and 80, it's already kind of high, worked up. Between 40 and 60 is a kind of basic active level, and between 20 and 40 it's serene, and between 0 and 20 it's really calm. So it means that you are sleeping or something like that. Okay, so now we wanted to know what happens in these situations of these high and low arousal episodes. So we combined the video data, and then we had these interviews with the teachers. So we watched from the video together with the teachers these episodes with high and low arousal levels, and they explained us what was happening there. And what we found out was that the teachers described mostly negative emotions such as anxiety, frustration, and uncertainty during the high arousal episodes. So it was mainly negative arousal instead of positive arousal. And these were quite often cognitively challenging situations. So there was kind of, for example, the teacher was unfamiliar with the subject, or they felt that they are lacking time to teach all the information to the students, or there was something that disrupted their concentration. Quite often there were challenges in the teacher-student interaction, so the teacher didn't really know how to maintain or create interaction, and also some challenges in teaching learning environment. For example, the facilities were not supporting teaching or so forth, and also quite often challenges with this online environment. So we had both sessions where the teacher was teaching face-to-face, but also online sessions. But also sometimes this high arousal was related to positive or negative, or a mix of positive and negative emotions. For example, the teacher was at the same time kind of experiencing enthusiasm and a bit of anxiety, or only positive emotions, for example, like flow experience or something like that. But mainly it was negative emotions. And we also find that this high arousal was quite often related with the transmissive approach. So in the high arousal episodes, the teachers were quite often lecturing, delivering information to the students. Okay. And then when we looked at the low arousal episodes and interviewed the teachers, we found out that they were more related with positive emotions or neutral emotions like relief or satisfaction, but also some negative emotions emerged, but they were like deactivating negative emotions like boredom. Yeah. And what was related to the low arousal episodes, quite often the topics that the teachers were teaching were really familiar, so the teacher didn't really have to put much of effort into the teaching, or the teacher was like monitoring the interaction between the students, but not engaged by him or herself in the situations very actively. And also we noticed that in these situations with low arousal, quite often the teachers were also like having this feeling that I have this under control, this situation, that I know what the students are thinking and I can follow their learning processes. So this kind of resonates with the kind of lack of this unreflective approach that we measure in the HEAT questionnaire. Okay, and then just some final conclusions from this. So we think that the teachers should be supported in becoming aware of what burdens them during the teaching and find ways to cope with the burdening situations. And it also seems to be quite clear that interaction lowers the arousal levels in teaching, while the transmissive teaching increases the arousal levels. Based on the qualitative data, and from the quantitative data, we could see that the unreflective approach was associated with higher arousal. So we think that teachers could recognize and take action in these cognitively challenging situations that they face while they are teaching. So quite often the teachers said when we looked at these high arousal episodes that I didn't really know if the students were following me, but they just continued. So they didn't stop there and discuss with the students that how are you understanding this and are you following me or do you have any questions? So it would be important to find ways to assure together with the students that the topics of the teaching are understood. So making somehow the challenging moments explicit. Okay, so I think this was my presentation today, so thank you very much. There is a QR code to the website of the wellbeing research project where we try to update the most recent news from our project. So you can follow that if you're interested in this project. Thank you very much. And now I think it's time for some questions and discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Lisa. I stopped the recording first.